Welcome to In Front of Ira, the podcast where we track the career of Steve Carell jumping out of cars.
Exactly that. I think we'll leave it at that, and we have the actual beginning on the other file anyway. Yes, but this is a Steve Carell appreciation podcast.
Yeah, I mean, occasionally.
Occasionally, we generally appreciate many people on this podcast. One of them is Steve Carell. So this is the episode of In Front of Ira on Crazy Stupid Love, a rom-com, and spoiler, I do think it is one, but a rom-com from 2011, written by Dan Fogelman and directed by Glenn Ficarra and Josh Requa. I don't know how to pronounce him. I guess we'll just jump in and quickly
let's talk about what the story is. So I'm going to go to my notes, and so Steve Carell, who is the main character in this movie, and I have once again forgotten what his name in the movie is. I don't know why I'm so bad at this. I don't think
Cal Weaver.
Cal, right? Cal. Yeah. It's Cal.
But it doesn't matter. Like, if you talk about the actors, it's easier for people who have not seen
right.
them.
So Steve Carell is at dinner with his wife, played by Julianne Moore, who, out of the blue, tells him she wants a divorce, which obviously confuses Steve Carell, and on the drive home prompts him to literally jump out of a moving car because she won't stop talking about it, and he wants her to stop talking about it. So he's basically in full denial mode, and that kicks off our movie with our ostensible hero having just jumped out of a car so he doesn't need to listen to why his wife wants to leave him, which I think is a strong start for a romantic comedy, I have to say.
Yeah, I just want to say it is a very memorable, I think, opening sequence. It throws you right in there. Also, do not forget that the actual hero of the film, of course, is David Lindhagen. Which, to be fair, is played by Kevin Bacon.
Which I have to say, this movie has so many people in it that it just it completely implodes the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
That's literally what I was about to say. It just upped his degree of
so many people.
As I recently found out, and so are you, I think, we're both 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon, and I mean, we're not famous by any means.
We didn't star with anyone in anything, but if it's just knowing people,
I have
with Kevin Bacon.
No, but 2 degrees off. So, I mean, as I figured out, and there's probably other connections I haven't made, but I've been on the same 60 Minutes episode with Brendan Hunt.
Starring?
Yeah, that counts. It's non-fiction.
It's an interview.
I don't care. Yeah. Still, and Kevin Bacon is doing interviews on the documentary on the National Lampoon movies that Chevy Chase is also in, and Chevy Chase was on Community.
But doesn't that mean that everyone who's doing like a red carpet interview is in the same thing as everybody else, and then Kevin Bacon is in
I'm gonna get there
with everything?
My new life's goal is then to just be 1 degree of Kevin Bacon.
Okay. We'll support you in your journey.
I will write an Emmy-winning screenplay, and then he can star in it.
You just need to call it Lindhagen.
David Lindhagen, who we'll talk about again.
Who's the only character I can remember the name of because it's so constantly referenced.
Anyway, so the opening sequence.
He jumps out of a car.
Is very strong. Also, I think what's interesting is the first shot we have is of their shoes under the table, and we do have several shots of shoes in the film because they do tell us something about their personalities as well. So because what he's wearing is these worn out New Balance sneakers.
Which prompts
and
this
they're at a
iconic line.
They're at a nice restaurant here too. So and the sneakers, as much as him simply letting himself fall out of a car, are both symptoms of the fact that he sort of, as later is said to his face by Ryan Gosling's character, is that he sort of lost track of who he is and sort of gave up and is not really fighting for his marriage anymore or himself or Yeah, like I feel like we're back to personal growth, but we can come back to that. Yeah, that's the opening. She says she wants a divorce. He doesn't fight her on it, so they're going to get a divorce. And one of the reasons, I mean, the bigger issue is that, you know, there's sort of, their marriage isn't anything anymore. They're sort of living together, but they're not apparently having a good marriage anymore. And that's why she ended up sleeping with David Lindhagen. Lindhagen.
Hagen, not Hagen.
Hagen. And
Hagen, like
yeah.
Das. That's what I would say if I was David Lindhagen. Yeah. So then we hop over to a completely unrelated scene with characters that have nothing to do with what's going on. And
so we think, obviously, at this point.
Spoiler. Which are Emma Stone and Lisa Lapira sitting in a bar, being hit on by Ryan Gosling. I have to be careful here because I get the Ryans confused. I got them confused.
I will never get them confused. They're both very handsome, but I would never confuse them.
They're two handsome white Canadian dudes about the same age. How am I not going to get them confused?
I think they're both really good actors and they have different qualities. This is how I do not confuse them. But yeah.
I sometimes get Ryan Gosling confused with the Jake Gyllenhaal, but that's a completely different story.
That's your problem, yes. Okay, so yeah, anyway, there's Emma Stone, and she gets hit on by Ryan Gosling, and yeah, but she shuts him down. There isn't much happening. We get the
she shuts him down, although like she has that same. We have kind of like the same dynamic we had in the last movie we did with the hospital scene, where like her friend is egging her on. Like she's I have to say, like Lisa Lapira in this movie is criminally underutilized. She plays the hell out of that scene. I wanted to see more of her.
Yeah,
she's basically just doing some pretty regular best friend stuff. But she's really good in this, kind of like really fawning over Ryan Gosling, selling the fact that Emma Stone should be into this guy, and she's not.
Like Frances McDormand and Something's Gotta Give You. Like, we want to see more of them, but they're not really in the film. Or Carrie Fisher and When Harry Met Sally, who has more screen time, but is the best when you're early on and they're still, you know, like not dating and sort of that really best friend role, and they're all underutilized. But it also speaks to these movies casting and writing that that even these small parts have, you know, value to them, and you believe in them as people, which is sometimes very tricky to do, I think. The other person, I don't know when we meet them, but soon after, because that's sort of the obstacle for Emma Stone getting together with Ryan Gosling, at least initially, is that she's with someone else who she thinks she'll probably get engaged to, and that doesn't happen. And that's Josh Groban.
Right.
Who also, whenever Josh Groban is in anything, you already know it's gonna be good. I'm sorry, but like he's also always good at it. Like he's playing this total dweeby lawyer that she's dating, and he's definitely not good enough for her. And he's like completely. I mean, he has leading man potential, but like I don't know why he hasn't been the leading man in any one of these films.
I think
because
honestly,
we don't make them, but
honestly, because he's Josh Groban and he has like scheduling issues. I listened to the Office Rewatch podcast, the Office Ladies one with Jenna Fisher and Angela Kinsey, and they had Josh Groban on because he was on an episode of The Office, and of course they talked about that he had been in Crazy Stupid Love with Steve Carell, which obviously Office crossover there, and he talked about how he always had issues kind of fitting these gigs into, you know, touring, and like there's a time constraint.
He's not toured for a while. I mean, his on-screen debut generally was on Ally McBeal 100 years ago,
which I think was before he was like Josh Groban. That
actually made him Josh Groban, because he's singing on the show, so that definitely also promoting his first album. But he's also the thing I found out very late that makes so much sense is that he's Juilliard trained. It's like, because he's one of those like triple threat at least, like, because I think the thing is with his acting, like, he's a very solid comedic actor, which we also see here. And
He's
we saw
constantly in comedies. Like, he keeps
yeah,
popping
he's
up.
crazy ex-girlfriend, where
Yeah.
he's just, I love him
Parks
the
and
most
Recreation.
when he's a version of himself.
That's Parks and
like,
Rec,
just
yeah,
a
that was-
complete, and that was he did that on what was that show with Robin Williams and Sarah Michelle Gellar that only had like
is
one
it The Crazy
season.
Ones or something? Yeah.
He did a crazy version of himself. He did a crazy version of, or maybe I'm mixing it up, but he definitely did a crazy version of himself on Glee. He did it on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. And here he's just, and this is what I'm saying, it is his feature film debut. It's Josh Groban's feature film.
And he talked about how he sometimes gets these roles because somebody literally kind of slides into his DMs and goes like, hey, we're doing an episode and we have a part for you. But he auditioned for this one. This was like a real actual movie role, which is why he's not playing Josh Groban. That's how you can tell. Okay, but we kind of need to set ourselves up. So Ryan Gosling hits on Emma Stone. Emma Stone shoots him down because she thinks she's going to be with Josh Groban, who is a lawyer guy at the law firm where she is also I don't know, interning. I don't know what do lawyers do. She's like not a full lawyer yet. She's gonna become a lawyer. And that finds us there. And then we have another storyline, which is at home, the kid, the son of Steve Carell and Julianne Moore, who is having teenager growing up issues, mostly because he is in love with Leo Tipton, who is his babysitter, right?
Yeah.
Who right off the bat, when I saw Leo Tipton in this is the most 2011 looking person you can imagine.
Oh yeah.
Like that hair, that whole style. I mean, Leo Tipton at that point should be fronting some like Brooklyn indie band looking like that. I mean, it's just crazy.
She looks sort of like she listens to Taylor Swift, but Taylor Swift now and not Taylor Swift in 2011. I cannot describe this to you, but anyway, she's a Swiftie. And but the other thing that's immediately established is because when we cut to her, we meet her as the babysitter of the kids. There's the 13-year-old boy who's a bigger part, and then he has a younger sister we barely see, but she's there, and she's the babysitter to both of them. And we also immediately get the sense that she has a crush on Steve Carell. So we have all these like age gap issues where she has a crush on this dad she's babysitting for, who's obviously much older, and his son has a crush on her, and they're only 4 years apart, but obviously at the ages of 13 and 17, that's a massive thing.
That makes a lot of
Jessica.
Jessica. So just a quick thing, because I just stumbled over something that might kind of get our whole like actors and versus roles thing confused, because Leo Tipton goes by they pronouns now, and so her character is she, and I'm not entirely sure because at that point in time I think she went by she. So like this is going to be a little bit of a tricky situation.
Okay, I didn't know this. So
let's call her Jessica.
If we talk about Jessica, we're going to use female pronouns because that's what the character is.
So Leo Tipton, who in real life is non-binary, and Jessica, who is very much a girl in love with Steve Carell.
I mean, for all we know, Jessica, now having matured, might also be non-binary, but that's a spin-off I might also want to watch. So anyway,
with Frances McDormand in it, basically, and Keanu Reeves. That's where we still
Jessica
are.
They're taking classes with women's studies professor Frances McDormand,
right? And then Keanu Reeves somehow shows up.
Yeah. Then they date Keanu Reeves because they're into older men. So there we are.
At that point that makes sense. Okay, perfect. Sense. Anyway, Jessica looking like the most 2011, but that hairstyle alone, this is the point where I felt weird about this movie because I was feeling nostalgic for the 2010s, which I realize that they are like over 10 years now, but it still feels weird.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I mean, it would be natural for me to have nostalgia for it because that's when I was in university. But at the same time, I still work at a university, so maybe my lines of nostalgia are being very blurred. I'm not necessarily nostalgic for being in my early 20s. Maybe that's my issue with it. But there is a certain air of like 2010s. Also, in the way we have phones that text, but they're not really smartphones. The things,
which is interesting because like this is like 4 years plus iPhone Plus. That was like the year that I got an iPhone. So like, but not everybody has one.
Yeah,
like, at this
and
point
we're seeing the 13-year-old and the 17-year-old, and it's realistic that not every
unlike those
teenager-
Veronica Mars like typing communicator things, right? I mean, also this would have been shot in 2010 when this is right at the kind
sort of
transition.
At the tipping point,
yeah.
and everyone would have had that, so it makes sense. And it's funny because that still puts it in almost a different time, right? Like I think the way the two of them would interact, like that 13-year-old and that 17-year-old, would also be different if they were on like TikTok, Instagram, whatever. But anyway.
It still feels very much like a 1980s, 1990s babysitter relationship. It doesn't feel.
And I think it's probably also paying homage to that. So, so we immediately get how they are connected. And I mean, spoiler, we don't get how Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling are connected. The way they're
Marissa Tomei later.
And the first. Obviously, inkling of how Ryan Gosling will be connected to Steve Carell, we get right away very soon after, is because Steve Carell now sits in this bar day and night getting drunk and complaining about David Lindhagen. And then Ryan Gosling at some point waves him over and is like, I will be basically Mr. Miyagi. I will train you to be a man.
Which is kind of interesting because it feels like 50% Queer Eye and 50% pickup artist. Like it's a weird, very 2010s also thing. Like because I think that was when like those books came out and there was this whole thing of like men can like do certain things in order to get women.
I honestly, that like as much as he's that ladies' man, the Jack Nicholson ladies' man and Something's Gotta Give is very different. And this character, Ryan Gosling's character here, would not have happened without How I Met Your Mother is the hill I will die on. That is just a version of Barney Stinson that's probably less creepy than Barney Stinson in retrospect. But he the way he sort of like lives of like you need to be a man and there's rules for it, and obviously Barney Stinson is a bit quirkier because it's all about the bro code and all of these things, but it's a sitcom. But here it's very much that, and he's sort of also a similar type of guy. Like Neil Patrick Harris and Ryan Gosling are very much like.
Yeah, it's like wear well-fitting suits that aren't from the Gap.
Suits as well. Also the whole focus on like how you dress and how you put yourself out there and wearing a suit. We always see him wearing suits the whole time, basically. And so it's definitely of that time as well. And but and the big twist of the film is that obviously at the end everything connects, and the way this connects is that Emma Stone is actually the oldest daughter of Steve Carell and Julianne Moore, because also why they've been married for so long, which we actually learned. She says we've been married for 23 years, which would have been they're in their 40s. But what happened is she got pregnant at 17. They met in high school. She got pregnant at 17. So
which there's a nice misdirect for that, which they because her nickname is Nana, which is usually like points towards like a grandmother, and it did register with me because I completely forgotten the plot from the last time I saw this, which was probably in 2011 or 2012. When they say like, oh, I talked to on the phone to Nana, and you were like, okay, yeah, maybe that's one of the grandmothers, but also weird. Like, why would you not say which one? It just kind of like registered, and I didn't think about it much more. And then the reveal is that her name is Hannah, and that was one of those, kids can't say Hannah,
banana.
Right? And became basically Nana in
I didn't even. I'm an idiot who didn't even make the grandmother connection, because there's one line when they meet for parent teacher night, and then she's like, "Oh, what about Nana? Yeah, she worries about us." But
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. It could have been
Right,
like
that's what I thought.
one of
That's
their
what I think.
mothers. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the connection. Since we're giving all this away already, the
Yeah,
other
I
the
mean-
other connection is, please, if you haven't watched this movie, watch this movie. Or if not, if you don't care about
Yeah,
spoilers,
I feel like
also
we
keep
all know
listening.
that, like, we talked
That's the
about whole
code.
films here, so
Yeah, it's the code. And so Ryan Gosling's character gets Steve Carell, to become, like a more presentable version of himself, a more attractive version of himself, who then goes out and ends up sleeping with a bunch of women. And one of these women, very noticeably, is Marisa Tomei. And he basically sleeps with her, and then that's the end of it, and doesn't call her back. And later we learn, as we go to a parent-teacher conference for the son, the one who is in love with the babysitter, that the teacher who's teaching the son is Marisa Tomei's character.
Yeah.
So that's another one of these like crazy connections. And obviously
Yeah.
she is very comically pissed at him the whole movie, which I think is really kind of work. Like, she doesn't actually stop being pissed at him, which is kind of, every time you see her, she's still
Yeah,
it's kind of it keeps on giving.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, like, it's also very much a romantic comedy that has actual comedy in it, but I think the two really just straightforward comedic performances in it are Marisa Tomei and Josh Groban, because they're both minor characters who are very much reduced to like having to one quality, I guess. And that makes sense. Like, she's sort of over the top. She's also that kind of cliche of like the crazy ex almost. And I mean, she's been wronged by him. That's like he definitely like, she has a right to be this way. But yeah, that's that. Everyone else obviously has more nuance because they're the main characters, and we have to have that balance between.
It just made me once again think that there aren't enough new romantic comedies starring Marisa Tomei, because she had like a whole run in the 90s where she had these roles, and she would be perfect for like basically a Diane Keaton kind of romantic comedy. Now she's got to be about that age, and she's incredibly funny in this.
She's really good. And the other thing that always strikes me right off the bat, how good Ryan Gosling is at comedy. Like, I don't know what I think of when I think of Ryan Gosling. I mean, I actually think of this movie a lot because I've seen it a bunch of times. I also saw it in the theaters, but that's probably not the go-to movie for Ryan Gosling, right? Especially since him and Emma Stone did
movie?
La La Land together.
Okay, I never saw that.
After, which is also, like, they definitely have chemistry, which I think comes across most obviously in the scene where they're in his house and do the dirty dancing routine, but then also talk through the night. But it makes sense. They did 2 more movies together. They did Gangster Squad, which wasn't very successful, but then they also did La La Land, which obviously, that was a massive hit in terms of awards, especially. And then, but yeah, I mean, he did the new Blade Runner. He did Drive. He did like all of these much more serious and action sort of things. Now he's going to be in Barbie, which I think is another way he's going to show off his comedic chops. But he not even La La Land isn't very funny, per se. So I think he has impeccable comedic timing, and there's a good reason that there's like 2 or 3 reaction gifs people still use from this movie. One of them is him chuckling at the climax of the film, that is everyone having weird, like having a fist fight in the garden because David Lindhagen is there, and everyone briefly bends. This is how everyone figures out how everyone is connected, and everyone, ends up banding together against David Lindhagen. But there's that moment of Ryan Gosling just chuckling when the police officers keep it in the family, Anyway, but yeah.
So
but
we have this whole plot line. I think the longest, most drawn out plot line in all of this is the Mr. Miyagi kind of pygmalioning of Steve Carell. into the more attractive version of Cal, like the which is interesting because at the same time it's kind of a reinvention, because Ryan Gosling says like the good thing about your age is you can kind of reinvent yourself with like 16 items in a wardrobe, and he like asks for the credit card and then buys him things that are not New Balance sneakers, which 2011 last time that you could make the Steve Jobs joke, because he says like, you the millionaire founder of Apple computers, if not then don't wear New Balance sneakers, because that was the Steve Jobs go-to sneaker. And then of course in 2011 Steve Jobs died, so nobody could ever make that joke again, I guess, unless you travel back in time in the movie. And it's kind of this reinvention, but at the same time kind of leading him back to himself, in the sense that he becomes more of a person who does interesting things, because he had lost that about himself. The Cal character.
So what's interesting with this is like, so much of the romantic comedies are always about, again, like the Nora Ephron, like personal growth, mostly of the male lead. But I think what's interesting with this one is that it actually also goes into more detail about what that means for masculinity as a concept. Like a lot of them are about like personal issues. And yes, for instance, Jack Nicholson's character is obviously about him being emotionally stunted compared to the women he interacts with, but it doesn't fully go at this necessarily being a core masculine issue per se. Like we have that Frances McDormand bit in the other film, but in this one, I think it's much more clearly thought out, also because we have several male leads that we can see this with, and we have Steve Carell, who's, even though he goes through this like reinvention, at the end of the day, he loves his wife, and he's always loved his wife, and he met her when he was like 15, 16. And he is actually fine with that. He doesn't need to like sleep around to feel more like a man. What this was about, I think, is also about maturity. I feel like this movie is so much about sort of like different masculine roles, but also about maturing into someone again.
Which is interesting, because both of them in the end learn from each other. It's not that he's learning from Ryan Gosling how to be Barney Stinson, and that's the goal. He does pick up that, and on the other hand, Ryan Gosling learns from him how you actually can be happy in your relationship, because that's another thing that comes up when Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone actually end up together, which is the scene after Emma Stone assumes that Josh Groban is going to propose to her, and instead he just says like, hey, congratulations, you now have a full-time job at the law firm, which, you know, nothing to sneeze at, but like if you're expecting a proposal, kind of a letdown. And instead then seeks out Ryan Gosling again, which actually kind of is a nice flip, because at first she fights him off, and he's actually kind of a little too clingy in that first scene. Like he's a little creepy how he like keeps trying to insinuate himself in the situation, but then lets her go. And the fact that she then comes back kind of like puts him on the same footing again.
Yeah, it's important that she's the one with the agency of actually seeking him out, and then they have that moment in the house where they do the Dirty Dancing lift.
But it's also not just because she basically then says like, I was very confident in the bar, but I'm not now anymore. So it feels much more not like such a cliche on either of these characters' parts. It feels like somebody really thought through how you would do this, right? You wouldn't just kind of like go up and be all confident, and then you're like, yeah, I'm this whole completely different person now.
Yeah.
Instead, you're still your own person. You just kind of stepped in front of your shadow there for a second.
Yeah, and then she's like, oh, show me his big thing, and it's the Dirty Dancing move. And so he sort of also like, it's also, I think, just completely throwing him, because normally like he's the one who's always like, don't ask me any, like he doesn't want to talk about himself at all. Like that's his big secret. He never talks about himself. And so, but the fact that she plainly asks him like, what's your big move, is like completely, you know, throwing his cards there as well, and to a woman, which he never does. And then the move works on her, but at the end she's still nervous. So they don't actually end up having sex. They end up just talking, and then he sort of really opens up. And it's a massive trope as well, but I think it works because he feels like a well-rounded character when he talks about his parents, that he had this like very sweet father who died. So he has like an absent father figure, and then this mother
Who made a lot of money, so he's like a
Yeah.
rich bachelor who doesn't know what to do with his life.
Yeah, and his mother, who's this like very beautiful, I think, model, who however was very emotionally distant, and so it's just like it's a trope, but like there's a reason for why these things happen and why people have weird attachment issues and end up in therapy at that age, because that's who their parents were. That's unfortunately not just a trope; that's just real life.
Yeah, and he basically tries to buy happiness. Like he's very much the and again, that's kind of a cliche, like the idea of you can buy all the things and that one of them is going to make you happy. So he buys all the stupid things of late night TV,
home shopping.
Yeah,
things,
the massage chair that he never uses, and all kinds of boxes that you see in his garage.
Yeah, and he tells about all the coin bears and weird collector's items,
which I still don't know what that is. There's bears that have like state quarters on them. Is that the idea?
In their feet. Yeah, I don't know. But I do legitimately love that we briefly have this cut to her in the massage chair and just like in her blanket, and he's still shirtless and they're down there.
Yeah.
Like I think it actually makes the comedy of that scene so much better.
And it's just kind of one of those cutaway things.
Yeah, it's just a cutaway joke, and then we're back. And it's that, and then obviously like the massive, like again that Fallout scene with David Lindhagen where everyone has a brawl in the garden is also one of those like outright comedic things.
That feels very much like out of a 1990s straight up comedy movie.
Yeah,
like something
and I mean, so in
style.
terms of like the people who wrote and directed this, it also makes sense. Like they all have very mixed credits in terms of the genres they've done. So like Fogelman actually worked with Disney and Pixar. Like he's written Cars and he wrote Tangled, and I think
Cars too. I mean, don't forget that.
We all need to forget about Cars too. But like Tangled actually makes so much sense because Tangled has that same mix of like Tangled is a romance rom-com as well, but it also has, you know, these other genres in it, and that action adventure type stuff. And then obviously all of them together ended up doing This Is Us, the television
you can see
series.
the DNA there. Yeah,
in terms of the family entanglements, and This Is Us works a lot with like reveals of how everything is connected that you didn't see coming. And
I looked this up on IMDb that he was behind Gallivant. I did not know that.
Yes, and that's the other thing he did with Disney.
Which is
straight up spoof comedy.
Timothy Omenson and what's Jesus. I don't actually know any of the other names from that show.
Yeah, I'm also completely blanking, even though I love that show. But
the Omenson is the only one I actually know from anything else. Joshua Sass. IMDb says.
Yeah. Unfortunately, most of the people who were on this also didn't really do much since, because there was sort of this little niche thing that also didn't have great ratings and magically even got only a second season before it was
Isn't that
canceled.
always how it goes?
But Gallivant was brilliant, and I think that also makes sense because it has obviously all the romance trope things in it too, and the Disney stuff. And so it makes sense. And I think for that, actually, Crazy Stupid Love, even though it has that comedy, is actually a very sort of, it is very romantic, or it has these very heartfelt, actual, genuine moments that I think we see more in This Is Us.
Yeah, it felt like more like that. I mean, it certainly has these light scenes, and the fact that Steve Carell is putting about 20% of Michael Scott into Cal makes it just like really funny. Just like when he has a scene where he just kind of doesn't want to recognize stuff. He does the Michael Scott "oh no" kind of like a thing a little bit there, and he's just I think I even liked Steve Carell movies when they're not good, and I think it's just because he is just inherently likable in this kind of ridiculous way, which really makes him work. It's always kind of like a cheat when you don't even have to have the writing be all that good, when you can just put Steve Carell there and it works.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to have that role of like, this guy is kind of lovelorn because he lost his wife because she's leaving him, but is now becoming this kind of ladies' man and isn't comfortable with that, but he goes through it, which is kind of like a little bit of his journey in 40-Year-Old Virgin. And it really works because it's him. And then even at the end, when he becomes this cliche American dad who doesn't want Ryan Gosling to date his daughter and basically forbids it, you can still kind of behind that see that there's a certain softness there, and that in the end he's going to relent. But put another actor there, it just comes off like a much more of an asshole move.
Yeah, and you said the 20% Michael Scott is definitely the 20% cringe comedy, which they don't fully take over the edge, but there's like certain moments, especially when he first talks to Marisa Tomei.
Which is also that famous GIF with Steve Carell and the drink going like.
Yeah, true. That's also from that. And don't drink from a straw. It makes you look like you're sucking on a tiny schwanz is also like a just immortal line, honestly. But my favorite version of that, actually, because he says the word twice in the film, is when they're in the sauna or the gym or whatever, and Ryan Gosling is naked, and the only thing that's blocking his penis is Steve Carell's head, and he's like, Kathke, you've been staring at my schwanz for 20 minutes if you don't mind doing that when we have a different problem. And I don't know, I think they're like, Carell is very believable, Gosling is also very believable, again, even though his backstory is sort of tropey, but it makes sense for him. And yeah, as you said, they learn from each other, and there's so much. I think why I think the overarching theme again is itself like personal growth, but it's also more that core issue of like age and maturity, and that's also why the B plot is the teenager and the babies, like the babysitter who's in love with a much older man, which obviously would never go anywhere and shouldn't go anywhere, and the teenager also being in love, even though the age difference is much smaller.
Yeah, it really feels like somebody like took all the tropes from like these 1980s sex comedies and shook them up and just kind of like laid them out, and like, how can we connect these in the most entertaining way possible for people to find out at the latest possible moment.
In the least creepy way, because when Steve Carell finally finds out she has a crush on him, his reaction is like, what? Like, ew. Yeah. You know, like, it's like he not even 1 second would he consider her anything but a child. And I think that's great, because it is totally believable that someone at 17 has a crush on this much older man. I definitely, when I was a teenager, I had crush on all these much older actors. It was usually not, or like celebrities. It wasn't anyone in my real life. Or that's not true. That I retract that statement. There were definitely people in my real life who are much older than me I've had crushes on, but thankfully none of them would have ever acted on that too, because they saw me as a child, which I was. And I think that makes sense, because she also has a ton of agency. Like, she takes these nude pictures for him, which also seems like the typical ballsy teenage girl move.
True, and very much again this is the last possible moment where you can do this in a pre-smartphone era, because she takes them with like a little digicam and then prints them out,
which is also so like, again, makes clear that she has sexual agency, because teenagers do. But she's still very much a child. And I think that's just the perfect, 17 is the perfect age for that too, like 16. So, and it makes sense. And then you have the 13-year-old who's also like, he's masturbating. Obviously, he's 13.
And he's telling her, I think of you, which is among the cringiest scenes in the movie.
But it also, like, he also, I mean, you know, and And it makes sense, and I think it's a fine line to also try to like give teenagers sexual agency, but then also still see it through the lens of the adults and go,
Yeah.
"Oh man, I remember that." But like, it's good that nobody acts on this, and she wouldn't act on it. I think it's cute at the end that she does give him the naked picture.
Do you think that's
But
good? That's the
I
one
don't
thing
know.
where I was
I
like,
mean, it is.
No.
The more often I see it, but at the same time, again, it's her agency. She took these pictures. She can do with them
I
whatever
know,
she
but
wants.
he's like, she's almost an adult, and he's very clearly not. So that
yeah, as
was
if he can't look at porn on the
for me.
internet, which is also
Right, but it's not a person that he knows. Like that's a very different
Yeah.
thing.
I mean, she's also, again, the film makes a whole point of her not being an adult, so she doesn't do anything bad.
Yeah, I know. It's still like, I know, like the whatever legalities of it may be what they are. It still feels iffy to me at the end. That's the only scene that does, honestly.
It feels. I mean,
with
it
all of
feels
this.
like I get both ways of seeing it. I mean, the fact that she is not an adult is fine, and then also I think it also just is another way to like put a bow on like one of the storylines.
No, I get like it's from a storytelling perspective, that's the perfect ending.
Yeah.
It's still a thing that I watched like this. So
yeah. But it's still her choice. Like, it would have been a different story if he somehow got hold of these pictures because she sent it to her dad. His dad.
Yeah,
right?
which I think is where we're supposed to think this is going.
Yeah.
Because her parents, this is the other subplot, which comes in. Her parents who know, who know his parents as well, and the dad even gives him kind of a gift. It's weird. I never quite understood that, kind of like a goodbye gift in a weird way. I don't know. And find these pictures, which is also one of those like typical like parents kind of not accidentally rifling through their teenagers' stuff and find these pictures, which is another one of those like tropey things that I did not love. Yeah, that I did not love. So everything comes together at this garden party, which or garden. I mean, what is that even?
I mean, it was supposed to be where Emma Stone, shows off her new boyfriend, which is Ryan Gosling, to her parents. But at the same time, for whatever reason, Steve Carell decides that this is also the moment he wants to try and win back his wife finally. Mm-hmm. And then so they're all there, and then
makes the grand romantic
because
gesture.
At the same time he finds and then the kids are there because he wants to involve him in that, because his son is the one who always tells him to fight for the love of his life, which is his mother. And then and then at the same time the parents of Jessica find her naked and then it all escalates.
Yeah.
And then David Lindhagen somehow randomly stumbles into...
Right, played by Kevin Bacon in one of his best roles, I have to say.
Yeah, and also I have to say, like, Kevin Bacon, I think what the other thing that works for me is that he's not an asshole, because it would be too easy to say, oh, she slept with this asshole from work and we don't like him. No, we do actually like him. The thing is, like, he never meant anything to her. She slipped because he was nice to her and he has a crush on her and complimented her
she
hair.
Actually,
and
ended up cheating with him because he is a nice guy, not because he's an asshole.
Yeah, because he paid attention to her when her husband didn't. And she even tries to date him to move on, and it clearly doesn't work. And at the end, you actually feel sorry for David Lindhagen. And that's the thing, right? Because he's sort of everyone is angry at him, but the thing is, he didn't do anything. I mean, yes, he slept with a married woman.
Which like he's 50% responsible for as well.
Yeah, but that's her as much as he is, and he's still not like a necessarily bad person. Like, they're all very human. And I think
none of this is unforgivable in any way.
And so and it's just, I think what also works for me is that at the end it's sort of open-ended. I mean, Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone are together, obviously, and Steve Carell is like, gives him his blessing, sort of. That had to happen, but what's open is whether or not Steve Carell and Julianne Moore will actually reconcile. They probably will. But it's not like they don't have a big romantic moment. It's that thing at the graduation of their son. And it's mostly like they're back to, if they reconcile, it's because they will try to make this marriage work again, which is not something you can decide on trying to do, which is probably what they do in that moment. But it's sort of still open-ended if this is gonna work, right? I mean, they clearly love each other, but it feels like a more realistic ending. So we have a happy ending, but it's not fully like, oh, everything is suddenly they're getting remarried or something. Like they're still divorced, right? So we don't know, and I think that works.
I mean, are they divorced, or were they going to get divorced?
Or yeah, we don't know if that's finalized. I mean, it is separate. Yeah, so they might not go through with the divorce then or whatever, but it's still sort of like, these are two people who love each other, and he realized he let himself go, and he apologizes, and we'll see where that's.
They don't try to over-explain the ending, which is also nice. It's not one of those movies that then it doesn't suffer from Steven Spielberg-itis, where the movie's over and then there's another 20 minutes in which you over-explain what just happened.
Oh god, The Fabelmans was that movie. That should have been half an hour shorter just because he needed to over-explain his point and then wink at the camera.
Every single Spielberg movie except for Jaws, I think, in Jurassic Park. So if you have like animals that attack you.
Does Raiders count? Because he doesn't over-explain Raiders.
I mean, is that even really a Steven Spielberg movie?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Does it count?
Well, if it supports my argument, it does. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. Very, very simple.
But yeah, and no, I think it works. Also, interesting tidbit. This was a blacklist film, so it was on that list of screenplays that people liked the most, but it wasn't made for some reason, and it sometimes they spend years on these lists and never get made. But
I looked up the budget and compared to the movie we just did, which had an $80 million budget in 2003. This had $50 million in 2011. So this would be today something between 67 and I think $78 million. So nothing to sneeze at, especially if you have that cadre of stars showing up, who I guess are reasonably big but not huge names. But
it's also 12 years ago, so a lot of them got even bigger.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like too big or too small. It feels like the right amount of money to make a good quality movie, without getting lazy, I guess. It's generally well told. When I realized this was going to go into everything's connected territory, which I think the first time we realized that is when Marisa Tomei turns out to be the teacher. I was kind of like, this is basically a kind of smarter version of, or a less pretentious version of tons of these movies that were out there in the 90s, where all these different characters are connected in some way, like Two Days in the Valley.
90s? Isn't that like early 2000s as well? Like Love Actually,
starts, but like it really, to me, what really kind of kicks it off is when 2 Days in the Valley becomes successful enough, which it's not a romantic comedy, so I guess we don't have to watch it. And then, what's the one with Crash is also like that.
Oh yeah, Crash.
And so like that's kind of. Yeah, but like that's basically 2 Days in the Valley is mid 90s. I mean, it has Terry Hatcher training for the Nagano Olympics. So
this
like
feels too niche. I'm going with Crash as the origin of this.
You need to know this movie. It was big enough in the 90s.
And then Love Actually 2003, because for rom-coms that definitely also did this. But I do think that Crazy Stupid Love again, it does it smarter. I think when they did This Is Us after This Is Us over Exit, it works in the first season of This Is Us, and then they sort of over egg it a bit as they go on, and then go back from it. But it's smart, it's well done, and I think of these types of movies, so far I like this one the best because it felt the most natural. It didn't feel like it was engineered to fit together all that well, which probably shows some really good engineering. And exactly, and you can still watch it even though like it's not hinging on you not knowing about the twist, which I think is crucial for these films. Like it's it's fine. Like that's not why you want to rewatch the film. You want to rewatch the film because they all work well together. They are all very charming performances. It has good humor in it. It has some really touching scenes in it. I think my favorite one might be, because it's also that understated, is, even though it hinges on the plot point of him still doing the gardening in his garden in secret, which, however, I think fits his character really well. And he's in the garden and sees his now ex-wife and his children having dinner together. And then she walks out of the room and is in her bedroom, I think, and calls him. And he sees that and answers the phone, and she's just, oh, I'm calling you because of the water heater. I'm in the basement. And we obviously know she's not in the basement. She just wants to talk to him. She just wants an excuse to talk to him. And obviously wanted that excuse because she was having dinner with her kids and missed her husband. And I think that's such a cute, genuine moment. And he also doesn't do anything other than go along with her ruse and just answers her question about the water heater. He doesn't sort of abuse the situation that he sees that she's lying. Like, it's just this cute moment, and I think that gives him the idea that there's still something there to fight for, definitely, and he wants to fight for it, so it's very important. But it's also just so, like, understated, and because she doesn't, it's not a grand gesture of her, like, calling him going, oh, I miss you and we should be back together and whatever. It's just
she can't quite admit it to herself yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's important for us to also understand that, this isn't over for her. I think the whole thing is, especially if you watch the film again, in the first sequence, all he would have had to say was, but what about our marriage? Why did you sleep with this guy? And she was already explaining to him why she did this. I don't even think she necessarily wanted a divorce. She wanted to have a conversation about their marriage. And he
wanted out, and that was the whole big thing of, like, his kid basically telling him to fight for his love. And he didn't fight, and then he picks it up and does it. And that's his growth.
That's the thing. Had he just fought for himself and his marriage, then none of this would have ever happened. And I think she would have been absolutely open to that. And had they had this fight for like a week back and forth, they would have never even considered actual divorce. They would have gotten through it, because she also doesn't have feelings for David Lindhagen. Poor David Lindhagen. But it's a good. The other very 2011 thing is the Shins song at the end. It's like
yeah.
I mean, to be fair, it could have been the early 2000s, but whenever the Shins come on anywhere, I'm like, is this secretly a Zach Braff film?
Yeah, it's very associated with.
See in the room with us right now. But yeah, and but yeah, to sort of wrap this up, so our taglines to sort of. Interestingly enough, this also doesn't really.
I mean, it has crazy, stupid love, basically, as its tagline.
Yeah, and the funny thing is the only taglines I could find are, this is crazy, this is stupid, this is love.
I mean, fair.
But it wasn't really. So again, I think the tagline stopped happening at some point. So what's your fake tagline?
My fake tagline is, Cal needs to find a new balance in his life.
Yes, especially with all the shoot. Yeah, it works. My fake taglines are obviously poor David Lindhagen. Or 2 degrees of David Lindhagen.
Nice.
Because everyone is connected. I mean, and now mind blown. Kevin Bacon had to be in this film where everyone is connected. He
connects everyone. My God, we're only coming to this now.
Oh my God. No, but also the other one I have is Be Better Than the Gap.
Also. Sorry, Gap. Did the Gap close because of this? Is the Gap closed? I have not been in a Gap in a long time.
I've bought things from the Gap like last year. I think they're still around.
So you are not better than the Gap.
I have t-shirts at least.
No.
And I'm also wearing a J. Crew t-shirt, which is the same conglomerate. So, anyway, in terms of reviews, I found they were mostly okay. Like it's sort of the typical rom-com thing where they all come in at like 60, 70.
This one's got a little bit of a higher
However many.
IMDb rating than the other
Yeah.
movies we've done. The other ones were all like 6.2, 6.4, I think. This is a 7.4. I think people really like this. And I think that also has something to do with our question, which we ask of every movie, and the movie never answers, but we do. Is this a
romantic
rom-com? Right.
And I think it definitely is.
And I think it's not. And I think that's why also it has a higher rating, because if you read this as not a romantic comedy, then also the people who don't like romantic comedies might be on board with this.
So what would you say it is then?
I think there's a very specific genre of these movies where everything ends up kind of coming together, where the focus is on that much more than the central romance, because like there are kind of like multiple central romances, and we'll get to that, I guess, at some point when we inevitably watch Love Actually. But to me, this felt much more This Is Us-y than a typical romantic comedy.
Yeah, although This Is Us is much more drama than comedy.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean. Yeah.
I mean,
it has comedic moments, but it felt to me like a drama with comedic moments rather than a full-on comedy.
Makes sense. I think why it's still, if it's a romantic comedy for me, then it's because, again, we're back to the Efron thing where it's really about personal growth, but it's less hinged on, I mean, yeah, I guess it's also the male leads having to do that, but I think it's everyone dealing with growing up. So I think you could make the case that this is about growing up, and
it's a coming of age film.
But it's also about, it's not just a coming of age because it's growing up that you do as an adult. It's about emotional maturity as well. And obviously for the teenagers in the film, it's about very much the actual sense of coming of age and growing up. But this is also why that there is the B plot, but everyone else also needs to have some growing up to do. And I think also why it works for them but so does Julianne Moore, right? I mean, it's everyone, and I think why the two of them have to do the growing up is obviously also because they got married so young and had a child so young that they skipped over so many steps in their life that it feels very
what
natural.
You really can tell with him, he basically does this sleeping around phase and realizes that it's actually not him, but he kind of needed that phase in order to realize
to at least
that he
have tried this, because he jumped over it right away.
He's trying a new flavor of ice cream just to say never again.
And I think also this is where the clothes and the shoe symbolism is actually so important. This is where the first thing we see in the movie is, because it also has to do with how you dress sort of as an adult. And I mean, that doesn't mean you can't wear New Balance sneakers, but he's sort of stuck in this teenage. He never actually left in some ways.
I mean, literally wearing suits a size too large is like such a classic I put on my dad's suit kind of move, and he's done this through his whole life. Yeah.
Whereas Ryan Gosling, I think, is outwardly very mature, but he also had to mature too quickly if he's lost his father early. So it's also about that. So yeah, it definitely, which is also a big, big theme in This Is Us, about a father dying when his kids are teen. So yeah, I give you that. I think it works sort of as a rom-com, but I do agree that it's a very big, like, it's a massive mix of genres at the end.
Yeah, which is fair. It's totally fine.
The reviews were fairly positive, and sort of also, I think, go in this vein. And what the one review that stuck with me was, studios rarely make movies like this anymore. And that's from an IGN review. And again, the film is 12 years ago. And already then could we say this, and it was true, which is also why I think it was a fairly big hit, because already then people were starved for actually smart, like, romantic comedies, dramedies, however you want to call this film, but like this kind of mid-budget film with a likable cast. And I mean, those are all big names, but I think there were less big names then. Again, this is before La La Land for Gosling and Stone, for instance. And so... I think, studios rarely make films like this anymore, and this is the big problem of, I think, why we will have much less films to discuss from the
we'll see. I just would like to add at the end that this movie is a really good movie that everybody should watch, but it really could have done with a little bit more Josh Groban and a little bit more Lisa Lapira. And
True.
I think it had the right amount of Marissa Tomei.
I think generally everything can do with a little bit more of Josh Groban, because even though people know him, I think he's still sort of
which I think most sitcoms are realizing.
realizing is like sprinkle in some Josh Groban, never fails. Anyway,
crazy,
let's cap it off
stupid,
there.
love.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.